Welcome to today's edition of Our Homes, Ending the Housing Crisis. I'm Ryan Catalani, and I'll be your host again today. Our guest today is Rick Holliday, a pioneer in affordable housing construction. He has more than 4 decades experience building affordable and market rate housing across California, including starting 2 of the most successful nonprofit housing corporations in the country. Today, he is founder and CEO of Factory OS, an ambitious effort to ease the housing challenge by scaling the off-site production of multifamily housing. Thank you, Rick, for joining us today from California.
It's nice to see you.
So Rick will start with a brief presentation. We'll have a Q&A, and as always, feel free to jump in with your comments. But first, if you've been on previous webinars, you know that we like to start by getting to know you, the audience, a bit better. This is the interactive portion, so please just fill out this quick anonymous survey to let us know how you are involved with housing. This is a great time for that jazz music or our homes, our house sound again.
Yeah.
All right, well, just a couple more seconds if you haven't filled it out yet. But it looks like we have a lot of close housing watchers on the call today. Good mix of industry professionals, advocates, researchers, some government. All right. Well, thanks everyone for letting us know who's here. Today also I wanted to mention that we'll be trying out something new, which is live audience questions. So if you'd like to ask your question yourself via video chat, just let me know by putting your name and your affiliation in the chat box. For the sake of time, we'll start out with just 1 question per person, but we may come around to you again, depending on how many questions there are. Also, you do still have the option of just typing in your question in the Q&A box, and I'll go ahead and ask Rick. And he's agreed to, keep this presentation pretty informal, so feel free to add in your questions as you think of them. I think that's it. So, Rick, I can pull up your presentation if you'd like.
Yeah.
All righty. Oops.
All right. So, as Ryan had mentioned, I'm calling in from Northern California, from a beautiful spot that rivals Hawaii in one regard. It's Lake Tahoe, for those of you who've been out this way. Why is that relevant? Well, 5 years ago, I was coming home from a visit up here, and I had started a big project to try to build workforce housing in Truckee because it is a tourism economy that was having a hard time housing workers. And I mentioned to my business partner on the way home from Truckee that the only way I thought we'd ever build anything up here would be to have somebody build it elsewhere and bring it to us or use offsite construction. And as luck would have it, I got an email that morning from a factory in Sacramento that had just opened up. And I visited them and placed a big order about 1 year later to try out the notion of factory-built housing on a project I did in San Francisco, 130 apartments. The good news was the project turned out really well. It was better quality, better delivered, a lot of things that I hoped for, saved time and money, and we were able to work with the unions in Sacramento to help supply workers to the factory there. And so I thought I'd be a customer. Sad fact is that company couldn't sustain itself. It's a very difficult business to raise capital for and maintain a pipeline and a management team. So they went out of business, and I got encouraged by a friend that runs the real estate platform for Google to start Factory OS. So we can go to the next slide. So go next. So the problem that we all are facing is that the conventional housing industry has not been able to meet the needs in the Bay Area and across California. And I'm presuming the same is true in Hawaii, or I probably wouldn't be on this call. Next. These are some just important facts about California, not worth spending a lot of time, but the most important is looking in the middle. It's 3.5 million homes are needed, according to a McKinsey study, which is just a number that's hard to believe. The average cost of building an apartment in San Francisco affordable is $750,000. So that's just, those numbers are just too overwhelming. So we got to do it different. We can go next. So what's really the problem? As I mentioned earlier, I'm a real estate developer, and I imagine many of you look at the housing problem through a different lens wherever you're working. But when you look at the circle to the left, from the developer's perspective, there's all these entities that go into trying to put a project together, and they're obviously not terribly well coordinated, and there's all kinds of inefficiencies built into the way we've done it. And the industry hasn't evolved much, and so we finally have hit a point where we have labor shortages that are just overbearing, and we have to do it differently. So next one. So we like to probably take some of the themes that may be part of your group, which is we think that a healthy life starts with a healthy home, and so we've positioned ourselves as a company that's primarily dedicated to building affordable housing, and we'll do housing other than affordable if our pipeline were to decrease, but at the current level of interest and orders, I doubt we'll be doing anything but affordable housing. Next. So in the Bay Area, we believe we can get up to 5,000 units built a year. And right now at the $750,000 figure, we think we can get it down to 350,000, which could lead to 2 billion savings a year just from our efforts. And so we believe that's what's possible, and we're putting that into our aspirational objectives. Next. So we have done the things that I mentioned, and you might have guessed this package was put together for a group of tech investors that have invested in the factory. So some of this is partly a solicitation as well as a presentation. So next. So we focus on affordable and workforce housing, as I said. One of the most important assets that we've picked up in the 2+ years that we've been in operation is we formed a partnership with Autodesk, which is the largest provider of architecture and engineering software in the world. They're headquartered in San Francisco. They came out to the factory about 18 months ago, and CEO and their chief technology officer, and they said, we want to partner with you. You need a software partner. You have a laboratory here that we work with you and the unions, and we'll marry better technological integration with real estate and better labor practices. And that was a big breakthrough for us 18 months ago. And it allowed us to plan an innovation lab where we'll be making an announcement shortly with Autodesk and some other tech companies, where we're going to be doing a lot of experimentation in a portion of the factory to explore using robotics and energy saving methods, different materials, different means and methods, and really trying to push the industry to innovate. Next. So we think the advantages of what we're doing are pretty basic. You can do things faster and lower risk. We actually are getting higher quality. The quality of the site building in Northern California has really been falling short because there's not enough workers, too much work, and a lot of uncoordinated activity. We get lower costs as a result of it, and we get an improved working environment. We've been studied for how much building material I think waste is down 70%, and to date we haven't had an injury in 2 years of operating the factory. So we think we create an improved work environment, and not having to deal with the weather is obviously a nice advantage. Next. Our history, as I said, 5 years ago, 2015 to 2018 is really when I was trying to understand the industry and I was a customer. And by 2018, I was pretty much committed to starting my own factory with a business partner. And the last 2 years, we've built 700 apartments, and I'll take you through and show you some of those. And we're headed to the next stage where we're going to try to integrate and scale more, which I'll talk to a little bit later in the presentation. So next. This is who we are. We got me, my operating partner is a general contractor, Larry Pace. I've known him more than 30 years. On architecture, I brought in an architect I've worked with for over 30 years. And in terms of trying to integrate with policy and some of the important partners we have in the lending world, I went to a colleague, Carol Galante, that I've worked with for a long time as well. So the four of us sort of partnered up to try to get this off the ground. Next. This is a picture of the building that was built in Sacramento, getting set and being built. It's really nice apartment in the South of Market area of San Francisco. And as I said, I would still be a customer getting these volumes shipped from Sacramento if the company was able to sustain itself, but they weren't. Next. As I mentioned, I had gotten an outreach from Google, and in February of 16, Google hired somebody to write a paper on why I should start a modular housing company as a way to sort of coax me into it. And that didn't quite work. So they said, how about if we order the first 300 apartments from your factory? So the Wall Street Journal article you'll see there is from June of 2017. It's just about 3 years old. And that article basically made the point that Google had placed an order with my company that I had just signed a lease in Vallejo. I didn't have any employees, a business card. We actually, I think it named the factory. But that order was what gave us the confidence to go ahead. Next. I then have spent the last 2 years traveling around the world, trying to understand what's going on. There's a lot of interesting work in Europe and in Scandinavia in particular. We were in Japan last year visiting Panasonic. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in Australia. I went down and visited them, Lend-Lease. Canada's got some things that are interesting, called Metric Modular we visited. This certainly is not everybody, but these are the folks that we visited in the last 18 months to try to collaborate, see if we can learn from each other. Next. There's a number of different companies. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time. There's probably another 10 that have been added just since this slide was done a few months ago. Next. These are just what different companies are doing. We can keep going. Our location, as you can see, is in where the star is in this graph, sort of the center of the West Coast, with Seattle and San Diego making up what we call the high cost ribbon. And we're on a waterway in Vallejo. And so we were able to build an entire project and put it on a boat and send it to Seattle or San Diego pretty efficiently. And then from the from the location, we can truck really efficiently to up to Truckee, Tahoe, which you can see was the inspiration for the company. Silicon Valley is only an hour and a half away. All the peninsula, San Francisco East Bay is only an hour away, and then Marin and some of the more expensive Sonoma counties is only an hour away. So we're very centrally located. Next. As I mentioned, we developed a partnership with Autodesk that was very powerful. We then went to Citibank because a lot of developers were struggling, as was I, in getting banks to understand how to engage with modular housing. And so we got Citibank to join our group as an investor with Autodesk about 15 months ago. I mentioned the academic partnership at Berkeley that Carol Galantes had a big role in. Just by way of historical background, the Turner Center at Cal is named after a very, very important person to housing and to me, was a guy named Don Turner, who was the founder of Bridge Housing with me. And he sadly was killed in a plane crash in the 90s trying to help build housing in South Africa and in Bosnia Herzegovina. He was on a very, very highly publicized plane crash. So we have the Turner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley, which is an important research partner. On the supply side, we got a number of building suppliers, Georgia Pacific being the most notable, that have come to us and said, we want to engage in affordable housing. How do we help? And we're starting to create relationships where they can give discounts to some of the nonprofit partners that we're selling to, that all the savings of the discounted material is passed through 100% to the buyer of the modules. And we're starting to grow that program pretty substantially. Next. Probably one of the most important things that we did was approach the Carpenters Union in Northern California and brought them in as a full-blown partner. And then they suggested we reach out to some of the other entities that have helped them find workers for their apprenticeship programs through the Prison Industry Authority and through a company named Delancey Street, which helps people try to find their way out of drug addiction and some other problems. So we've got those three entities sort of helping us build our labor pool. And we've been very, very happy with that relationship. Next. Let's picture some of our workers. Next. These are some of the projects that we've built. Union is in West Oakland, Mayfair is in El Cerrito, which is near the Bay Area. The intersection's in Emeryville, which is also in the East Bay, and the Phoenix is in West Oakland. Those are all projects that are finishing now. As I said, we started production 2 years ago. And so we're going to start having a steady stream of finished projects to show people. Next. We've gotten a lot of orders. This is just an example of what we have, all the stuff that is Truckee Artist Lofts I just mentioned, where it says in production. That actually is finished and is coming up to Truckee, which is the Tahoe project I mentioned earlier. Next. We are oversold. We're actually starting a second factory. We have over 1,000 units of supportive housing that's been ordered from Los Angeles and from the Bay Area. Next.
Sorry, do I see Hawaii as one of your states here?
Take a look here. HHH.
Just in the bottom right corner.
Yeah, you know, there may be, remember I was mentioning there's the folks that are wanting to do the factory in Hawaii, and we may have mentioned that we're thinking as far away as Hawaii, but I don't think we have a specific Hawaii project.
Got it, okay.
I think that is probably giving people an inkling that we might go beyond California. Next. These are some metrics that a lot of people don't believe perhaps are relevant to why the average cost of doing a unit now was 711,000, and the ones that we finished in the last 12 months were 430, so there's a pretty significant savings. The ones that are in the pipeline now are going to be even about 120,000 on average less per door. Next. So this goes to the issue, if you can get 5,000 units produced a year, you can save a lot of money. And then if you take those savings and to build more housing, you get 6,000 more apartments. So this is trying to make the point that we've got to invest in trying to do it more efficiently to get more housing, because we have a limited amount of money. At least we do in Northern California. Next. So this is what we've done. I'll leave this presentation, by the way, so people can look at it more. So we can go to the next one. We're almost done, so we can get into questions. We're opening a second factory. We're going to add general contracting to part of what we do. We're going to increase our partnership with Autodesk, and we're going to expand into Los Angeles. So that's what we're about now. Next. Ultimately, that circle I showed you earlier with all those arrows going all the different directions, we see something that looks more like this. You have to have a centralized effort that starts with the unit you want to build at the factory, and then work out from there to get everything integrated and more efficient. Next. And these are forecasts that, you know, we're pretty confident in. Next. A lot of people ask about COVID. This is just, we don't really know exactly what the impact is, but the housing problem is just getting worse for people that are really struggling. So that's about it. And I think that's it for the presentation. Yeah, this is who's on our board. And this is where we're headed. We're trying to get people who want to join us and get on with it. So.
Excellent, thank you. So if you have any questions, yeah, please let us know. But I guess,
yeah.
One thing to start off with, you know, you have a history of seeing these trends in affordable housing over your course of multiple decades, from mixed-use development, lofts, now modular design. What do you attribute, you know, your insights for these trends? How do you come up with these ideas?
I guess it's one of those things. Necessity is the mother of invention. My interest in doing live work housing south of Market was born in the fact I had started bridge housing. I was looking to do something different than what I'd been doing. And south of Market then was littered with empty buildings that had been printing companies that had hollowed out in the 70s and gone out to the suburban locations. And so I saw a housing shortage, difficult getting entitlements in all these empty buildings. Movies that glamorized loft living, but probably most importantly, personal computing. This is before the internet. So remember, it's 1988, fax machines were a new item. That's just home fax machines. Cell phones were a new item. But the tools that allowed people to entrepreneur were starting in personal computers, were really emerging. A lot of people were very entrepreneurial. So I could see a market for what we called live work that was very different than artist live work, and regenerating kind of an abandoned area. And boy, was that right, because that part of South of Market now, it's probably some of the most valuable real estate in the world. I should have stayed developing there longer.
Yeah. Well, it looks like you're back to San Francisco anyway.
Yeah.
One audience question, how high can you build? Are you building steel frame or just stick frame?
At the moment, we're doing just stick, and we can go five levels over a concrete podium. However, we're working with Autodesk and some Google folks on cross-laminated timber as a building product. And what it is very, very dense plywood, as the way I describe it. And if you build your lateral forces with cross-laminated timber, you get a building that can go as high as 20 stories in wood. And so we have a cross-laminated timber prototype that we're going to start building in the near term.
We have a question from Kevin Carney from the audience. I think you should be able to ask himself.
Hello, aloha, Rick. This is Kevin Carney. I'm with EAH Housing over here in Hawaii. And coincidentally, I was reading an article in the West Hawaii newspaper. They're trying, this is on the Big Island. They're making changes to their building code and trying to include prefab housing. A huge pushback from the Carpenters Union.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, you know, how did you get that Carpenters Union there in California on board? They're particularly concerned now during this COVID period of the loss of jobs as well.
So how did I get the Carpenters Union? Basically, by the way, I go so far back with EAH that I knew Martin Mackey, who was the first executive director of EAH when I was the first executive director of Eden Housing, just to really date myself, in 1979. More specifically to your question, I went to see a guy named Bobby Alvarado, who's the largest, he oversees the Carpenters Union and he holds the highest rank. And this is a byproduct of experience. He and I had a lot of different disagreements and fights over the years when affordable housing was colliding with union issues. And we both had a very long talk about how screwed up our industries are. And we both agreed that we needed to work together. The industry wasn't producing enough workers because we have a big shortage. And so we decided the factory would be a way to work on it together. And we formed an alliance and we wrote up an agreement with them, and they help find and train people. So it's been wonderful for us, and I think they found it to be really useful. They've taken some grief from the plumbers and electrical union in San Francisco, but not a lot. And you know, we've hired 400 workers, which is a lot of workers, but when you look at the overall labor pool, it's not like we're eating into a lot of jobs. With the COVID thing and the layoffs, to your point, we haven't had any pushback from the unions as yet because everybody's still building. And all of the labor studies that I've seen are showing that people that fit more my profile of boomers have retired. Millennials aren't going into the business, and our immigration policies, at least on the mainland, are pushing out a lot of the Hispanic workers that have been feeding the industry. And so we have a structural deficit of workers that's very, very real that we've got to figure out how to overcome. And so I think that creating a factory environment where you can attract new workers that are many of them getting second chances and taking minimum wage jobs and getting 2 and 3 times their income is a good thing, especially if they're building affordable housing. And so far, we've had some people that grumble, but nothing more than that. So I don't know if that answered the question, Kevin, but it was a byproduct of probably knowing Bobby for a long time, and we have a certain respect and trust for each other.
When you say you hired 400 people, what percentage of those were actually from the Carpenters Union?
None of them. We basically hired people fresh and trained them, and they became union workers when they came in.
Okay.
I mean, we have to build a new workforce here. We just don't have enough workers.
Yeah.
I mean, we were getting the latest bridge job. This will resonate. I meant the latest bridge job that finished in San Francisco is $1 million a unit.
Right. Yeah, I'm aware of. We had that conversation.
So we have an unsustainable situation. When the unions bellyache at me, I say, "Will you give me a good idea to get the cost of affordable housing down from $1 million then? You know, why am I supposed to figure out all of your problems and you don't take any responsibility for housing being so expensive, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I applaud Bobby because he saw that they need to be part of the solution rather than trying to bellyache about about what they may be gaining or losing. So it's I think that the reason why it worked here is we were hitting levels of cost and labor shortages that I think are unimaginable. This is before COVID, so your point's well taken. That we've had people grumble about it, but not really jump up and down heavily, if you know what I mean.
Well, our situation in Hawaii is very similar to yours, just on a smaller scale.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing prices, well over $500,000 a unit, and
Yeah.
we just don't have the subsidy funding to
Right.
carry that, to sustain that going forward. So
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I've got lots of other questions,
Okay.
but I would like to follow up with you at some point and
Completely.
find out more about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of EAH. Like I said, I've known your company for a long time. Is Al Burnett still there?
No, Al Burnett finally retired.
Oh, all right. Well, please give my best. I know Mary quite well.
And Mary's still there.
Oh, good. Well, Ryan, is there another question?
Small world. Sure, yes. Is shipping to Hawaii cost effective at this point, or do you think a factory here would be more efficient?
I think that's a complicated question. I would need somebody that would really help try to provide some kind of demand study, because it would make more sense to do it there, clearly. It gets into the issues Kevin was raising, is how deep is the labor shortage, and can you really help try to build a new labor force to build the housing? So I think you start to see if there's enough demand. The cost of shipping to Hawaii, I don't know the numbers, but I do know this. There are people in the Bay Area that are receiving shipments from China on boats. And when they're telling me what their shipping costs are, either they're lying or they're ridiculously low. And I think maybe they're not. I think the shipping costs are less than people think, but I don't know. So I would pose that we probably could supply Hawaii, especially a year from now, when we get better at what we're doing and really create more value. If it costs $5,000 per unit for the transport, you should be saving way more than that by utilizing our work.
Thanks. We might get back to more feasibility questions in a second, but I wanted to get to this other question. Can you apply this approach to for sale housing? And what would be the things to consider in for sale versus rental?
The answer is yes. Really with for sale, at least in the Northern California, it's more about the finishes than anything else. Probably apply maybe a different or higher level finish depending on what level you're going for. One of the advantages to building with modules is you're building the walls more substantially because they're thicker, and the floor to ceiling is thicker because you have a floor and a ceiling membrane. And really, usually what you want in a condominium or apartment, if it's multifamily, is you want to block the noise out and have better energy efficiency, right? And modular building really is ideally suited to give a better STC rating and to be able to innovate more around energy saving. So I think that it works well for apartments or condominiums. And the things that when I've built condominiums, it's been more about noise transmission between units and views. And we're able to put some pretty big windows in our units. It's a structural issue in terms of getting your shear and other parts of the unit, but a lot of times people will build smaller windows in order, and the units are pretty boring, but we figured out with Autodesk how to get bigger windows. So
Yeah, there's a cool video on your website that shows a clip of them installing some of those giant
Yeah, right.
floor to ceiling
Yeah,
windows.
yeah. No, exactly. Yeah.
Um, so on the factory side, is how much variation can you produce? Like, is there one standard housing unit, or does it produce different sized units? How does that work?
Um, the the at current, we've produced many different floor plans in the first 2 years. We didn't necessarily do that by design. We did it because the projects that found us to be our first projects were already designed and not necessarily contemplating modular construction. So we had to adapt them to modular, which is not what I highly recommend. Some of the projects that we're starting to plan now for the future, we're taking a prescribed set of floor plans, about 15 to 20, and we're trying to give them to interested parties before they get deep into the design and say, if you build out of this catalog of plans, we can get you a better value and greater speed. So we're trying to force conformity. Not just one unit, but let's say maybe 20 floor plans that might be 3 studio types, 3 or 4 1-bedrooms, some 2 bedrooms, and maybe a 3. This will be for affordable apartments.
Right. So you have sort of your Sears catalog of
Yeah.
units that you can produce quickly on
Yeah.
demand.
You really have to do that. I mean, I think that's definitely, it's the classic chicken or egg problem, because what you need to do is give an architect the units that you want them to plan the building for, and let them try to put a building on the site that meets community desires, and also landscape and create the community spaces. That's what the architect needs to focus on, and get them out of having to do all the working drawings and all of the sort of boring stuff that oftentimes leads to frustration, change orders, and stuff like that. So,
Well, if we start to think about the feasibility of something like this in Hawaii, there's a question about if we build a factory sort of like yours in Hawaii,
yeah.
what would be the minimum number of units that must be produced annually to make it financially viable? And what would be the factory cost to build, ballpark, and sort of the annual operating costs there?
I'd say simple numbers, about 1,000 units a year would be what I put as sort of a minimum. Size of the building, probably a couple 100,000 square foot building. You could put up a couple 100,000 square foot building, kind of a Butler building or a classic industrial building, for about $100 a foot. So that might be $20 million for the cost of creating the structure. And then another probably $15 million for equipment, and probably another $15 million for working capital and training. So 50 million is probably a pretty good round number. And 1,000 apartments would be on the low end.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I noticed, on your website, you talk about how Factory OS, or OS, stands for a lot of things. One of them maybe being open source. So
Yeah.
I think that could be really useful. Your insights.
Yeah. Well,
people are interested in pursuing it further.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I'll tell you that the story behind OS is actually rather humorous. I was out to dinner with my wife, who's really smart, and we've been married a long, long time. She was not terribly happy about the fact I was starting another business at age 62. But I said, I really have to do this. I want to try it. So I said, but I got to come up with a brand and a business card now that Google wants this order. So she goes, well, you're a factory, right? And I said, yes. She goes, why don't you call yourself a factory? Okay, fine. She goes, and you keep saying that your main interest is to build offsite and bring it to the site. So why don't you just be Factory OS, And then we can put an underscore, make Google feel good because they made the order. So that was how the name came up. And then she said, well, you know, you keep saying that you need to integrate with architecture and engineering, and everybody thinks you should be a tech company, so you probably want to have an operating system, which we actually are working on. It'll be proprietary, maybe worth something to other factories. Then you keep saying that you want to share this, as you don't want to just have one factory, so open source. So I said, wow, that's really, really good. So she goes, well, just make sure I always get the credit for it. So in the vein of that conversation, that's the answer. My wife did it. And the final one is she looked at me, we were finishing the dinner, and I was actually impressed with what she'd done. She said, Rick, there's one more OS. It's oh shit, you're starting another business. So those are the 4 relevancies of Factory OS. All courtesy of Nancy Holliday.
That's a great story, and credit duly noted.
Yeah, she did the website. She did the website with my daughter. And hello.
Just heard my name.
Yeah, she stuck her head in there. So she did the website and all of the collateral material for the factory. So I'm very fortunate. Yeah.
Another audience question: have you considered alternative building materials other than wood?
Yes. I think that the simple answer is yes. We're staying with traditional materials, at least for the first few years. They're going to constantly challenge new materials. Most notable being cross-laminated timber. Some people think we should get into metal studs, and that can allow us to go higher, and there's some advantages there. Some people that are really concerned about sustainable building products aren't happy about that. There are a lot of really interesting innovations in sheetrock, because the one thing that really is stupid is the whole notion of putting up plasterboard and then having a 3 or 4 step process to coat it, sand it, coat it, sand it, paint it. The sheetrocking process is the stupidest part of our factory production. And I've been challenging everybody I know at Berkeley's engineering school, and every kid I find, or any inventor, to say, you come up with something to compete with sheetrock and the way we finish interior walls, and you will be a very, very happy person. So there's some people that have got, like Google has got a whole lab called Google X that we've been interacted with some. They got some people that are looking at some pretty out there building products where you take eggshells and you smash them up and you can make floors out of them and things like that. So the answer is we're very curious, and we intend to be exploring in the lab that we build within the factory all the time.
Very cool. You know, one question that a lot of people have had, and I'm sure you've come across a lot too, certainly talked about the efficiencies and the affordability, the cost savings. That all seems to make sense, but there is sort of this existing bias toward what already works, what people know. You know, the way all these systems are already set up, blending, regulations, zoning,
Yeah.
all these things. So how did you how have you overcome all of these, you know, this this bias towards what's already working, what people already know today?
It's a very important question. I would say we're in the process of doing it. And how is that working? Well, what I've learned is by having the factory as a place that you can come visit. Oh, by the way, when this COVID ends, it may be wonderful to have any of you come visit. But in the Bay Area, it's pretty easy for at least people in Northern California to get to the factory, at least before COVID. And I haven't had the governor yet. I've had the lieutenant governor, the treasurer, the head of the Housing and Community Development, the head of CHFA, the head of the League of California Cities. Many of these people that are actively concerned about why is housing cost so much. They come to the factory, and we don't have the answer just within the factory. But I'm amazed that when you come into a factory, you hear nails hammering, you see workers, and you see people building the basic building blocks of an affordable housing development, and you see it being done with a lot of determination and innovation. You start going, well, what could we do? So then I've had different people in planning departments and at the state level go, are there policies that we have that are making this harder that we could adapt? Lenders, in the case of Citibank, were saying, are there things lenders can do, right? And what we found is it becomes a bit of a magnet for people coming at the industry from different perspectives to say, how can I engage and how do I need to think differently to try to be part of taking this nucleus of solving the problem and building outward from it. And what I'm finding is the more people that we can engage in the problem solving, the more we realize we can break down these barriers that are just institutional. But if you try to do it all at once, it makes you crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure people here are all too familiar with that. A quick follow-up question about the building materials. Have you considered in particular styrofoam as a building material?
You know, I don't know. We probably should, but I don't know. I'm going to ask you the question, is it being considered in certain situations or applications that you're aware of?
I am not, I'll let the person type
I
in.
see. Because I mean, sometimes I learn as much sometimes from these interactions. I think a lot of innovation is about to come to the building industry. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a styrofoam product that maybe is very promising that we don't know about yet.
Got it. Okay. So, one thing we've done in this series is we're looking to other places to see what's working or what ideas they have.
Yeah.
And in Singapore in particular, with their public housing model, they use prefab or modular housing for the vast majority, 70 to 80% of their public housing. Are you familiar with that? And, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm familiar with that. It's got a very broad application, but I haven't been to Singapore as yet. So it's on my list. I saw little dots around the globe. I do want to visit. I had a great visit in Tokyo in December with Panasonic, who's been building very efficiently in a factory for 50 years. And they're getting into a joint venture with Toyota to do some really interesting stuff where they're taking a lot of stuff that they've learned from making cars smart, and putting it into houses. So. Maybe 10 minutes? Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
No problem. Do you have a thought about what percentage of the housing problem could be solved by widespread off-site construction? And what are your thoughts on what remains to be solved in this field?
Well, I mean, just pulling a number kind of out of thin air, I would say when I look at the Bay Area, which is really what I know for 4 years, probably if you look at what we consider multifamily housing is the product, I would bet that at least 50% of it can be built in a factory, and probably more. On the single family side, there's actually a fairly large, you can pick up a Dwell magazine, all you see is prefab this, prefab that. The whole architectural style now is actually kind of boxy and kind of, I don't know if that goes out of style, maybe it won't happen. But the whole interest in ADUs has become a very, very big deal here for accessory dwelling units. That's obviously lends itself perfectly to a factory. And then to the sites that can't use it, I think a lot of the things we're going to learn in the factory will actually probably translate to site building. So I think we'll ultimately have an impact on all of it at some point.
Just got to follow up again on the construction materials. So it does look like there's a company called Green Builders here in Hawaii that is using a material called SABS or SABS Strata. But we'll share your contact info at the end, and maybe this person can follow up with you more about that.
Yeah, I've got somebody working in the factory now who's very focused on this, and it may be good to put them in touch.
Awesome.
Yeah.
One interesting thing, and you sort of alluded to, is that with offsite construction, everyone needs to be on the same page much earlier on than maybe in a traditional housing project. Did you have any challenges with, just sort of getting any sort of planning issues or, these sort of having to deal with all these things up front rather than as you go along?
Yeah, yes, basically, back to what I had said earlier, when we've had people visit the factory from all these different sort of interest groups, it's sometimes easy for me to be able to show them some of the difficulties we had in our first 3 or 4 projects and say, these are the kinds of things we're trying to iron out in the future. And sometimes it's really easy to start to explain what we want from somebody, be it a policy change or a lending situation, by giving them a very specific example of what the impact is. And so that's an ongoing process.
Yeah, there were, I think people are very interested in, if you faced, and sort of the obstacles you faced with like local building officials, like you mentioned, approving your plans, or with lenders, given that construction funding, usually works a certain way with materials having to show up on site. So have you been able to find, has it been just mostly relationship building, or did you have to find sort of innovative solutions to these issues?
Kind of more relationship building. See, the crazy situation maybe all of us are in, you sit down with an architect, get them a little bit drunk, or an engineer, you get a little drunk with them. You look at each other and they go, well, we don't really like what you're doing because it's going to disrupt what we've been doing. And it's very understandable. But they also understand we can't keep doing what we've been doing because we're at an impasse, right? And so the more you're able to sort of get people in a place, this is the California thing. We need 3.5 million housing units. There's plenty of work for everybody. We just got to figure out how to redistribute and do it differently. You know what I mean? It'd be almost like, date me. I mean, word processors were new when Don and I started Bridge Housing in 1983. Okay, the secretaries were all pissed off because they were no longer going to get the type letters on an IBM Selectric, and we're worried we'd run them out of business. We would have never had a word processor. So I just think the building industry needs to realize, in our whole industry, we just haven't modernized. And we need to find a constructive way to do it.
Yeah, there's an interesting statistic, I think, from a McKinsey report that construction productivity has not really increased since World War II.
Exactly. It's the one industry that hasn't. Yeah. And like I say, as someone who's been guilty as charged of being a beneficiary of an industry that's been good to me, that sort of works. And here we are, though, after being in it for 40 years, I realized it's not sustainable. So we got to really go at it a different way, which is what gave me the motivation to take the factory on.
So you have a lot of experience in this. One of the questions is, what are the most important lessons you've learned in your long and varied career?
All right. I think that most important lesson learned is professional relationships are really important. I'm always amazed how many times I may engage somebody in a professional situation, not see them for 5 years and re-engage 5 years later. And the power of the relationship is much more significant because of the experience. And if you treat every professional relationship as if it's a relationship that you may last your professional lifetime, I think you'll build a really good network of people to work with.
And that's certainly important in Hawaii too, where we're a small state. You're going to work with everyone eventually, so it's important to maintain those relationships, to build those relationships.
Yeah. It's it sounds simple, but I mean, it's part of it is just takes time and communicating, and also being able to overcome adversity. the people that I've had the best relationships are the ones that I've had the most challenges and difficulties with. Either we had a very challenging project that was hard to figure out, or we were in different places on a project and we're fighting over something. But I think if I was giving somebody advice, try to take those experiences and build on them positively. If you keep doing that, you can end up with a good network of people and it works more fun than two.
Mhm. So, you have this innovative model, but, obviously still it's in the minority of,
Yeah.
overall construction projects.
Yeah.
Where do you go from here to get more traction for this idea? If given that you said that maybe half of the, affordable housing need can be met through this method.
Well, I think that one of the things that hopefully you'll see a little more of is that we think that the Bay Area, for better or worse, has created a horrible problem, partly because we've created so many jobs, 700,000 jobs in very few housing units. And we've got all of this technological horsepower and two major universities. So it's not like we have all the answers here, but we need to really be serious about doing something dramatic and making it available more broadly and trying to really push the notion of scaling it. So I'll be announcing some new partnerships, hopefully within the next 3 weeks, that will speak to that point very clearly. We're about more than just doing something in Vallejo. We're going to hopefully reach to your needs and other people's in the U.S.
Well, that sounds very promising. And one of the questions earlier had been, if the conditions were right, would you consider either opening a branch here or expanding to the Hawaii market?
The answer is, of course. I think what I'm trying to do is build a really strong team of generally got to be younger people than me, and that really share a deep passion for building and a desire to really challenge all of us to just do what we do better. And I found in the last 6 months, I've been very encouraged because we've been getting more and more people finding us and wanting to work with us. And 18 months ago, it was kind of hard to get people to work because we looked like we were kind of a fledgling startup in a place called Vallejo, which isn't a terribly exciting place to work. So I think we've gotten over the sort of startup just frenzy. And now we're ready to stabilize and get a bigger crew.
All right. Well, that sounds exciting. I mean,
Yeah,
we'll,
I got
we'll
my wife
be on the
tapping me
lookout.
on the shoulder. It's 2:30.
Yes.
So I'll tell
I
her
just
the
wanted
open
to,
source is over.
yeah, no, I just wanted to thank you again. Thanks again to our guest, Rick Holliday. And as I mentioned, you can contact him at rholliday@factoryos.com, Holiday with 2 L's. Thanks for being here today, Rick.
It was a pleasure, and I'm going to duck off and get back to Lake Tahoe. But I hope to see either you in Hawaii or perhaps you in Northern California or Stanley as well, if anybody else has been on the call.
Thanks. We will look forward to it. And to our guests, before you leave, just please take this quick anonymous survey to let us know what you thought. And we'll see you at the next edition of Our Homes, Ending the Housing Crisis. Thanks again.
Right.